Back in 2021, my husband and I were camping in Wyoming at the Boysen Reservoir. We got really lucky and were able to book a beachfront site directly leading to the water, but the downside was that it was very, very far away from the other campsites. We were essentially isolated from everyone else. At the time, though, it sounded like a dream come true. The thing about Wyoming is that it's so desolate to the point where it's pitch black and eerily dead silent once the sun is gone. We set up our camp and enjoyed our fire, but shortly after that, a random SUV with blacked out windows came driving down our road and into our sight. They drove towards us. My husband tried to wave to them in case they were lost and needed help, but instead they ignored us and drove down to the beach, stayed there for 5 minutes, turned around, and went back up the way they came. We immediately got a bad vibe. My husband told me to throw everything in the car, and he kept shining a flashlight towards the beach because we had a feeling they dropped someone off to watch us. After we packed up, we got in the car and hauled it. Lo and behold, the same car drove back into our campsite, and when they saw us leaving, they actually started chasing us. Mind you, the roads in Wyoming are bumpy and unkept when you're in the wilderness. On top of that, enormous wildlife that wanders in and out of the streets. My husband said, "I have to go fast, are you okay with that?" And I said, "Just go and get us out of here." We were easily going 80 miles per hour down these windy roads and even through a canyon. They were on our tail for about 10 minutes until we lost them after passing through the canyon. Most terrifying experience of our lives. We think about it to this day and wonder what could have happened if we didn't listen to our gut at that moment. An annual campout my search and rescue team does every fall. It's a retreat, and we do some training and just hang and bond as a team. Well, we were doing night training, and my dog, who was trained for cabodeer and man trailing at the time, alerted to a scent, so we followed it deep into the darkness. We got to a slick, I guess, a creek bed, and I had a terrible fall. I slid to a small cliff and off it. Broke 2 ribs and concussed. I pressed the emergency alert on my GPS that signals base camp when we are either lost or have found the target and need assistance bringing them out. Well, my dog vanishes on me, and I hear footsteps a time later, and a super creepy random guy starts talking to me. Talks about how often people end up in the creek, how often people die because of a sudden flood during hurricane season or tornado season. Just something really off about the dude. He started to look for a safe way down into the creek. Mind you, I'm barely able to breathe, let alone put up much of a fight. Then I hear it. My dog is part Aussie, and Aussie talks to us to communicate. It's a series of thrills, ahoos, rolled aroos, and different barks. He's using his hurry up slowpoke noises and is close. The guy looks off towards the noise and seems to decide to not come down to where I was. I see one of our team's other dogs first, a massive German Shepherd. He's one of the softest, most sensitive dogs I know, and he immediately goes hackles up, teeth bared, growling and threat display barking at the stranger. Dude backs up away from Ranger, and Brody, my dog, appears and immediately does the same. Maybe 5 steps later are 2 of my team members. One was a former Marine officer, and the other guy did MMA professionally. Not UFC, but one of the other pro promotions. The guy just stares as they try to extract me from the creek. The dogs continue to escalate their threat noises at the guy. He watched the entire time my teammate stabilized me and called for the backboard and the wheelie, which is an ATV wheel with a welded frame that the backboard can attach to. They wheeled me down to camp, and our medical people cleared my neck, though still went to the very rural hospital. According to one of the nurses, the area we were working had a high number of assaults, both physical and sexual. I fully believe to this day that would have been my fate if Ranger hadn't shown up when he did. Still involved in SIR and have a lot of weird stories from searches, but nothing quite as disturbing as the man that night. Brody is long since retired, and Ranger's nearing that age too. To this day, I don't know what scent Brody was following because the training wasn't set up the direction we ended up. We did file a suspicious activity report with the police, but nothing came of it that I'm aware. Back about the spring of 1994, I went camping with a small group of friends in Suches, Georgia. Kind of off the beaten path, a short hike in. Nice place, primitive, but definitely defined large, heavily wooded sites. Upon my arrival, one couple, good friends of mine, were there already. As I came bounding in all jovial and enthusiastic, I immediately noticed something was off. My friend, Kate, was making big eyes at me, and as I looked around, I saw my friend, her husband Ted, standing by the tents with some dirty David Koresh looking dude. Kate then whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "This dude won't leave us alone." I tried to get what was wrong, but from what it sounded like, he was just a kind of lonely guy out in the woods by himself, and we were just unlucky enough to be his next door campsite neighbors. As the day went on, he was trying to insert himself into everything we were doing. And not just that, but everything he did was just off. For example, as we were prepping for our big dinner, which is always a highlight of our trips, he brought over his cooler to show us his dinner plan, which was literally a steak floating in bloody cooler water with a couple of beers. By this time, two other friends had shown up and they were just like, "What the frick?" As we were setting out our food, sort of buffet style, as everyone had pitched in to prepare something camping fabulous for the meal, here he comes, with his chair, all wet and muddy like he just crawled up the riverbanks. The sites were far enough apart that we had time to do a quick huddle and decide that Ted, who is a large dude and who made first contact, would tactfully and politely ask this guy to please respect the boundaries of our campsite, and that our meal had been carefully planned and we had been looking forward to getting away, hanging out alone with our tight-knit group. Surprisingly, he seemed to get the picture and actually seemed a little embarrassed. No hard feelings, see you around kind of vibe. We were all relieved and actually felt a little pity for the guy. As it got dark and we were all stuffed, sitting around our campfire, having partaken in various calming vices, suddenly, out of the darkness and into our firelight comes our neighbor. We immediately go silent as he proceeds to join our circle and plop down in front of the fire. As he pulled his knees up to his chest, we all noticed at once that he held loosely, in one hand, a giant Desert Eagle pistol with his finger resting on the trigger. We froze and just stared at him for what seemed to be an eternity. Then he said, just as casually as could be, "Anyone want to check out my piece?" We just stared in disbelief. Then my buddy Dave just pipes up and said, "Nope, but thank you." To which the dude just casually took the gun and said, "Okay," got up, and sauntered back off into the darkness. He didn't seem to have a flashlight or anything, and it totally freaked us out because we just didn't know where he was. Until about a half hour later when his campfire suddenly was ablaze with 7-inch high flames. And there he was, hopping around the fire naked. As far as we could tell from that distance, jumping around the fire with a gas can, periodically dumping more gas on the fire. It was about a half hour of intense insanity, and just like that, it ended. We didn't hear a single sound. As I remember, we all stayed up pretty late, and that night I don't think any of us slept without one eye open. The next day, when we all got up, there was no sign of him except for a melted red and yellow plastic gas can. We spent another night there and ended up having a great time, but I'd be lying if I said we weren't all a little on edge for the remainder. This past summer, my partner and I were camping in the Adirondack. We found a great, privately owned little backwoods campsite that consisted of just 2 lots. Accessible by car, 4-wheel drive required, right by the water. Very peaceful and secluded. It looked great on the website. When we arrived, we went to the owner's house up on the main road, and they provided the instructions on how to reach the site. When I tell you the owner's house was creepy, I mean it was creepy. It was a trailer home surrounded by the weirdest garbage. Empty fish tanks, dirty old children's toys, doll heads, disfigured scarecrows. Proper spooky crap. Our alarm bells were already going off. Turns out, accessing the site required at least 15 minutes of straight off-roading, though they assured us the path had been well cleared, and we took confidence from the many positive reviews we had seen for the site. We set out down the grass path to our site. As we progressed down the path, it became increasingly clear that the route was, in fact, not easily passable by car. It had been a rainy summer and the ground was slippery mud and knee-deep puddles. The overhanging branches were barely cleared, as if the owners hadn't cleared it for a year or two. And the path narrowed considerably the further we went. By the time it was clear that things would only get worse, the path had become way too narrow to turn around, and the chances we could reverse our truck the whole way, 15 minutes up steeply sloped off-roading conditions, seemed equally impossible. At one point, when we were assessing the path on foot, I noticed what was a very, very clear human footprint in the mud. A bare foot, definitely not either of ours. It still gives me the shivers to think about. Regardless, having few other options, we pushed forward until we eventually reached our site. Frankly, I'm amazed we even got there. It was around 8:30 and we were tired, so we decided to just stick it out, set up camp, and leave in the morning. But neither of us slept that night. The site absolutely seems like it could have been a secret hangout for drug addicts, or worse. Given the owners, it was also possible this whole site was a setup to rob campers in the night. We didn't tell each other until the morning, but we were both strategizing escape routes in case we were descended upon by unsavory characters. Problem was that it proceeded to rain all night, and there was a very real possibility we wouldn't be able to drive back out on all the mud, given the conditions of the path. There was a very real possibility we were going to need to call for an emergency rescue or tow out. But the thought of being stuck in that creepy, secluded site for another night, or more until whenever it stopped raining and dried out, was way, way worse than paying the premium to get out. So in the morning, we trekked up on foot, assessed the route, and decided to make a go of it. By some miracle, and my partner's driving skills, plus a beast of a truck, God bless you, Ford, we got out. I think we were both nearly in hysterical tears when we saw the main road. We drove our exhausted, dirty, delirious selves to the nearest coffee shop, a Dunkin', a treat for us Canadians, and celebrated over mediocre coffee and breakfast sandwiches while we booked a motel for the rest of our trip. Moral? Trust your gut. We should have turned back when we both got red flags from the owner's vibe. Then we should have turned back when the path first became a bit rough. We will pick our sites more carefully next time. For about 2 years, I worked as an instructor at a therapeutic wilderness program in western North Carolina. I was in charge of at risk youth, and my job included all the responsibilities and nuances associated with that. Shifts ran 16 days straight, on the clock 24/7 of that time, and all spent backpacking. Most of this takes place in Nantahala National Forest, DuPont State Forest, and Panthertown Valley. Here are some of the creepy things that happened to me and my groups out there. Without delving too much into programming and wilderness therapy in general, I do have to explain certain aspects of the job, so bear with me. Because none of these kids are voluntarily in the program, some are a flight risk. To minimize the success of potential runaways, staff are required to sleep under an open tarp and between the doors of the tents. Often our setup looked like two tents facing under a large A-frame tarp with staff sleeping between. Another precaution is called boot line. The kids' boots stayed lined up under gear tarp at night. Hard to run in your camp Crocs. Anyhow, this boot line is visible from under the sleeping tarp. So this particular night, we were camped in some of the most far-flung areas the program goes to. We simply referred to it as Parkway Expo, because our expedition often begun with being dropped alongside the Blue Ridge Parkway and hiking into the rugged wilderness that surrounds it. It's a spot called Wet Camp Gap. From the sleeping tarp, I can see the boot line across camp in the direction of my feet. It's my job to wake up once every 3 hours for a silent head count. I wake up from my 3 a.m. check and turn on the red filter on my headlamp. I have a weird feeling. I first scan boot line. Something isn't right. 13 pairs of boots. Take some time to register. Usually when something doesn't feel right, there's a pair or two missing and a kid or two gone. There's only 12 kids. At the end of boot line, there's a pair of tall men's hunting boots. Staff boots aren't kept there. As this dawns on me in my sleepy haze, I snap to reality, sit up, and switch to my white light. It casts light across the camp, and the second the light fell on the hunting boots, the man who had been standing in them the whole time suddenly turned and walked off into the brush. That was a moment of sheer terror as I jumped up after him. He was long gone by the time I wiggled out of my sleeping bag. The following day we were packing up and making breakfast when a group of 3 men walked through the field we were in. The trail runs right through it, so it's not unusual, but they came out of the woods from a strange angle perpendicular to the trail. I was over in the far corner of camp with one co-instructor doing a daily briefing when they entered just a few yards away. They stopped and looked at us. All were armed. I recognized one's boots immediately. "Gave me a scare last night," I said. None spoke, only stared blankly. "You guys okay? You lost?" Still no response. The situation feels uneasy as they stare at us, gaze unbroken. "Here, let me show you my map." It's already in my hand. I get up from the stump I'm sitting on and approach. The trio suddenly turns and walks on across the clearing and out of view. I was glad we were moving the opposite way and only had one more night till our pickup and transport to base camp. That final night we're all sound asleep. About 2 a.m. or so. The night is broken by a blood-curdling scream. It's my female co-instructor. She's frantically running her fingers through her hair and completely inconsolable. I get her away from the group and calms down enough to speak. She says she woke up to what she assumed was a large spider or a mouse in her hair. But when she turned on her headlamp, she was greeted by the face of the tall, booted hillbilly in night vision goggles. He'd gotten almost a full braid in before she woke up and he fled. We never saw any more of them, but she never came back for another shift either. The poor thing. A few weeks later, the local SNR found a woman who'd gone missing nearby. She had been accosted by a man and tied to a tree, then left there. She was found alive something like 4 days later, still bound. I was camping at the base of Tierras Peak in Colorado, near the lake that sits at its feet. I'm about to fall asleep when I hear something outside of our tent, the sound of small twigs snapping underfoot. It is slow and careful sounding. I start to think and hope that it's just a deer or something wild. I'd much rather it be an animal than a human, because a human slowly walking around our tent in the middle of the night is probably up to no good. My ice axe is just outside the tent, so I think I'd try to slowly unzip the tent and grab the axe. Then the thing starts making noises. It stops moving, maybe 5 feet from our tent, and it starts breathing heavily and then scraping on something just outside the tent. Suddenly it stops again, and maybe 20 seconds later it makes an odd sound. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Kind of like a person with hoarse vocal cords trying to say, huh? But more forceful. The whoop doesn't sound like an owl. It honestly sounds human. I quickly unzip the tent, grab our ice axes, and am ready to start swinging. I'm too chicken to jump out of the tent, so I just lay there clutching my axe. The thing finally walks away, and I am so tired from hiking in all day that I fall asleep shortly after. The next morning we get up and survey the area, finding that the stump a few feet from our tent had been gnawed or scratched on pretty significantly. There weren't any large hoof or footprints around the camp. To this day, I wish I had have jumped out and shined my light around to see what it was. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and have a marvelous day. Stay humble. Stay grateful.